Okay, well, welcome everybody to the Masters of Art Talk. This evening, our speaker is going to be Martha Ressler, who I'm sure you're all familiar with. Okay, I'd like to start the evening with a short business meeting by our president, Judy Bird Williams. So let me turn that over to Judy.
I want to let everybody be aware that we are going on vacation in July. So we will not have a Masters of Art lecture and art forum in July. And so I will turn it back over now to Don.
So our speaker this evening is Martha Ressler, as you know. She's an artist who works in cloth and creates phenomenal pieces which actually blow me away. So with that, let me turn it over to Martha because she will talk about her career and travel through art. Martha.
Thank you, Don and Judy and everybody. Thank you for inviting me. I will just jump right in to my story. This is a picture that was in the newspaper in 1965. I'm the one seated on the edge of the couch here. This was about my mother, who was an artist, with one of her early paintings on the wall. Both my younger sisters are holding paintings that they made, but not me. I wasn't any kind of an artist. My contribution was that I sewed their outfits and my own outfit. And sewing, in fact, has been a constant in my life, from sewing doll clothes, my first business and selling them, making my own clothes in high school, to 13 years as a sewing machine operator in factories during my years involved in the union movement, to my current artwork, making art quilts. Meanwhile, I was absorbing art from my mother. I was her assistant in teaching art classes to children, and I absorbed lessons of composition from her too. I very much enjoyed visiting museums and art galleries with her, and I was so proud of her career as a painter. That's my little sister at her right elbow, but I was there also somewhere. I guess you could say I gave it a shot in college. I took painting, and I especially enjoyed life drawing classes. I did a lot of sketches outdoors. This was from a trip I took traveling alone around Europe in 1969, just doing little sketches as I went. But I never had the fire in the belly like my mother did. I graduated from college in 1970. I'm flanked there by my parents. I majored in history, probably had enough courses to have a minor in art. And then a couple years later, I went on to get a master's degree in history of art from University of Michigan. But then life took a sharp turn for me. At Oberlin, I went to a few anti-war protests, but I didn't really get involved in any groups. During my period at University of Michigan, however, I became very active politically, inspired by the movement against the war in Vietnam, the women's liberation movement, the civil rights movement for Black rights. I joined the socialist movement, and my political activity ended up defining the next 33 years of my life. During the time at University of Michigan, during graduate school, I was a political activist. I studied hard, plus I taught a course as a graduate teaching assistant, and I kept sewing on the side. Here I was selling my blue jean hats, they were called, made out of blue jeans, of course, other things I could find, and some people actually wore them on their heads. When I graduated, I could not find a job in the field of art history or women's studies. It was a bit of a recession right then, 1975. So I went to work in the post office. I worked all the crazy shifts you have to work in the post office, rotating shifts, midnight shift, this and that. I got involved in the union as a union steward. That's me speaking at a postal workers convention. Then the next 30 years, the first 20 or 25 or even 30 years were very satisfying to me, really. I was learning how to organize, how to be part of a team leadership. I was learning working class history and followed world politics very closely. I met really good people like this farmer Roger, a farmer activist in Monroe, Louisiana. We were discussing a book. Or Kathy, I'm still in touch with her at a Equal Rights Amendment demonstration in Washington. Got involved in my union any chance I could. This is when I was in the United Auto Workers Union. We traveled to Washington, D.C. to march for the Equal Rights Amendment. There was some time for fun as well as factory work. Here my brief career as a runner. That's me, I think. I ran my one and only 10K, broke no records whatsoever. Here I am on the assembly line at General Motors. I worked at 3 different General Motors plants for a total of 9 years on different parts of each of those plants on the assembly lines. At Lion Knitting Mills in Cleveland with Ruby, a friend and union sister. I remember I thought it'd be a good idea if we signed a petition to free Nelson Mandela in South Africa, who was in prison. And most of my union friends thought that was why should we do that? That's so far away. And then they signed it. And then every so often they'd ask me, well, is that guy free yet? Is he still in prison? So it was, soon after that he was finally freed. And maybe our little petition helped. I don't know. I ended up working in plants, everything, sewing plants from women's pants to swimming suits, men's suits, blue jeans, sweaters, men's neckties in St. Louis, designer dresses, men's custom shirts, about 13 years altogether as a sewing machine operator, all kinds of different machines. Occasionally, I could do some travel sketches. This was on a trip to London to work on a voluntary work brigade. Meanwhile, I was picking up all kinds of construction skills. I'm still not very good, but I can hold my own doing this and that as a laborer. But basically, otherwise I was completely unconnected to the art world during this whole time. For about 2 weeks, I think, I took a leave from my job and joined some friends driving a little truck down to Nicaragua, delivering supplies during the revolution there. I took my sketchbook and was sketching every chance I could get. I was so interested in the water systems in Bluefields. It was a cistern at the top, which drained into the house so that people had water. We drove all the way to Bluefields on the Atlantic coast, delivering a generator and medical supplies all the way through Mexico and Central America in a time of great unrest. It was a real education in driving through Central America. This is how gas stations worked. No electric pumps. You just poured the gas in through a funnel and into the truck. I guess I was helping hold the funnel or something to get the gas in the tank. I lived in 10 cities total, assembling autos for GM, 4 years in meat packing, a couple years in a steel mill. Meanwhile, becoming involved in countless union, civil rights, women's rights, gay rights, anti-apartheid demonstrations. This was with fellow union members on a Greyhound picket line, 1989. Lived in 6 different states. The last one before landing in Pittsburgh was Colorado. This is Douglas Mountain, which made quite an impression on me. I had tried to learn to drive a tractor trailer truck in Colorado, but backed off when I imagined driving on Douglas Mountain. that just scared the heck out of me. I did become competent as a front-end loader operator in a surface mine, however, during that period. We lived on the western slope. My husband was mining coal. I got a job briefly in a coal mine, but I was not very well suited. I was not very well suited to that. Meanwhile, art was calling to me, beckoning. I kept thinking of images I wanted to create. I remember waking up in the middle of the night thinking how much I wanted to change my life, stop the political activity, and become an artist. But I kept telling myself in my late 50s, well, it's just too late. You've made your decision on what you're going to do, and you just can't become an artist worth anything starting this late. At some point in Colorado, I felt like I'd reached the end of the road. 9/11 happened while I was driving a dump truck in a surface mine. And I remember now the feeling of dread, of foreboding I had. I just felt that wars were going to follow one after the other, and that's what they did. About the same time, my urge to find an artistic creative outlet was becoming very strong. We were assigned in the movement to move to Pittsburgh, and we did that, but I quit the movement just a few years later in 2006. I was 57 and I felt like I was starting life all over again. Felt like day one of my life. I had lost all continuity with my academic work, my hard work in history of art. I knew no one in the art community. I knew no one, period, really, outside a small group of activists. So when I quit, the first thing I did was make a quilt for our bed. I guess that makes no sense to anyone but me, except that I wanted to have an evening where I could just sit at home and unbothered and not have to go to meetings and just finish something. I quit my job in a meatpacking plant. I found a new job as an office worker. I started sketching. I took a painting class, went to life drawing classes, and I started meeting people. This is my first painting. It's called Steel Dreams. It was 2006. I remember I sent my mother a picture of it, and she says, "Oh dear, that X in the middle." I can hear her saying that right now. That's true. It has a little compositional problems, but it had great meaning to me. This was an old steel plant that had closed down, and workers' livelihoods, in effect, were stolen from them. Nature was reclaiming these ruins, bringing the land back to where it had been. It just, you can kind of, when I'm telling you this story, see the kind of layers of meaning that this had for me. I took a painting class with Ron Donahue, a plein air painter in Pittsburgh. I hate to admit this among a bunch of artists, but he's really still my favorite painter in the world. You can look him up. He changed how I looked at light. He changed how I looked at things, period. A lot of the principles of painting, of course, are also applied to painting with fabric. You have to follow the same artistic rules. In painting, I first took up acrylic, then oil painting, again, mostly plein air. These are a couple of ones from my gritty industrial neighborhood in Lawrenceville, Pittsburgh. I'm very embarrassed at my thin paint over here, but otherwise they aren't too bad. This was a commission for this company, actually. Those guys posed for me, taking a little break. The highlight of my brief painting career was a commission for McConway and Torley. It's a foundry in Pittsburgh, which was my employer. I was working in the office there. The paintings are 11 total, are installed in their conference room. I believe they're still there, as far as I know. They gave me access to the whole plant. I was guided by various supervisors on all shifts. I worked from photos and sketches. I did not set up my easel in the middle of the, in front of this melter here. I had asked, let's see here, this was just a couple others of them tapping the first heat. McConway and Torley, by the way, is the last place in Pittsburgh that's where they're still pouring hot steel. They don't make steel; it's a foundry. The steel goes into molds, and thus into making railroad parts. They're branching out to some other stuff right now, but I asked to see the best welder. Here on the left, Jeff. I wanted to depict the best grinder, Dave. I wanted to depict real people, real workers, not just a generalization of workers. I'd been a worker for so many years that I really didn't even think about doing anything else but depict them as real people. Those who know Dave or Jeff could recognize them actually, just from their posture, could recognize them in these paintings, even with all of their PPE on, all the things that they're wearing. But fabric and fiber kept pulling me towards it. Now, why was this? There was a particularly strong group, Fiber Arts Guild in Pittsburgh, still very strong. And I went to their shows, and I was particularly inspired by the works of Tina Williams Brewer, who is still a friend of mine. She never was attracted to the traditional quilt block. Instead, through using layers of fabric, printing on fabric, plus found objects, she tells the multi-layer story of African American history and experience. And I wanted to learn these techniques to tell my own story. Finally took some classes in both fabric collage and then art quilts. It's a little bit different. Art quilts have to have at least 2 layers, more likely 3 layers, and the stitching goes all the way through. Fabric collage is just collaged fabric with some stitching, but not necessarily the layered approach that you have in art quilts. These early pieces, color was flooding every image. I couldn't get enough of color, couldn't get enough fabric. These are some of the first free hanging art quilts, again, the kind that's stitched all the way through. And art quilts, again, it's art for the wall. It's not, these are wall size, not beds. It's not for the beds. Art quilts are fine art, is a fine art medium. Some art quilts had a clear tie into the industrial paintings I had been doing before. I did a number of versions of what I call tapping steel, the idea of just steel flowing. Normally it would be flowing into something, but I just had this idea of it flowing from the past to the present and into the future. This one was a scene at McConway and Torley, actually, by the light of the moon and the glow of the arc furnace, but I did it as a quilt. This is an example of a painting and a quilt of the same subject. This old warehouse on 48th Street in 2009. This is oil on canvas. This is a quilt of it. I just added more of an element of fantasy to it. This is a picture from the 1920s of workers working, welding on a riveting on a bridge. And this next year, but similar. I think actually, I don't know, painting's probably a little bit better, but anyway, I was playing with it. I did a lot of this series. I was very inspired by the work of the Westmoreland Museum of American Art in uncovering the paintings done by painters during the heyday of steel in Pittsburgh. They kind of call it the Pittsburgh School. There's a whole history to that, which is extremely interesting. But as I went to the Westmoreland, studied these paintings, bought books on them, talked to the curator, I was inspired to kind of, use them as inspiration for my own art quilts. The one on the left is, I call it River of Industry. It's inspired by a painting by Everett Longley Warner from 1941. On the right, my quilt I call Casting Scene. It's inspired by an etching by Jean-Émile Laboyer. It was from 1906. His etching was. Well, 2014, we moved from Pittsburgh. We had built a house here in Tilden Township on land that belonged to Jay's parents. They gifted us the land. We built the house. It's just what we wanted, a small house, big studio. We still live here. That's me in my studio before it's become as cluttered as it is now. I take half of it, Jay takes half of it. We work here virtually every day, really. We retired from our day jobs at that time in 2014. At first, I floundered when I moved here. Should I continue making industrial images? Is that what defined me? Should I continue to use found objects? I'd been picking them up and incorporating them at my quilts in Pittsburgh because I was doing a lot of walking and picking up things on the streets and using them. What was me? I really wasn't so sure. This is an early one of the steel stacks in Bethlehem, but was I really going to just go to Bethlehem all the time and get all my images from there? It didn't make sense. This is one, on my morning walk, a little bit of an abstract quality, but I have all these found objects in it that I had picked up on the streets in Pittsburgh, and I was trying to make sense of that, and I really couldn't make sense of it. I was floundering. I was thinking. I was trying to figure it out. This one's called Stone House in the Valley in Kempton. You'll see this subject matter. I've used it several times. I was beginning to be inspired by my local rural landscapes all around me, but I was still incorporating these found objects that I had found in the streets of Pittsburgh and still couldn't quite have it make sense, but I was thinking about it. This one is called Across the Meadow, also Kempton. This one uses some papers and texts and buttons in that one. I haven't used buttons before or since, but at least it doesn't have all the things I had picked up in Pittsburgh. So it's kind of a step away from that period. These two, the one on the left is called Spilled Red, inspired by a neighbor's tree in the fall. I removed their house, I removed their garage, I desaturated the color on everything except for the tree, the leaves on the tree and the fallen leaves. And this one's called September. It was actually a challenge in this quilt group that I joined briefly, where we all brought pieces of the ugliest fabric we had, and each person had to take a piece of everyone's ugly fabric and incorporate it somehow. So that's my attempt to use bits of everybody's ugly fabric, but I like the way it came out. I had, pretty much I'd realized what inspired me was what surrounded me. Now I only use found objects if they make sense to the image. This one, however, was made entirely of plastic bags. I call it my forever landscape. They say plastic never disintegrates, so I guess this landscape never will either. It's called Birch Tree in Winter. And this one is called Rampant Meadow. It's a commission for the Hershey Medical Center, and I believe it would be it is still hanging there now. These are inspired by our garden. Milkweed food fit for a monarch. We became very interested in gardening, first for the birds, then for the pollinators. We still grow milkweed for the caterpillar, monarch caterpillars, which feed only on milkweed, so we have plenty of it. And this one was inspired by our first harvest in our garden. I was so proud of the soil. I'd been composting and doing all these things, so I left a lot of the image of the soil on the beets and onion. In 2016, I was inspired by some of my painter friends and decided to attempt to make 30 art quilts in 30 days. They thought I was crazy. I guess I was. Most of these were pretty small. I came pretty close. I got made 28 in January of 2016. These are 4 of them. This is about the house on the hill. When I was just kind of being silly, I guess. I was taking neighbors' houses, neighbors' lawn ornaments, and kind of collaging them, quilting them, making little stories, which were cracking me up. I don't know if it amuses anybody else, but I was amusing myself. This one is inspired because I broke my wrist at the beginning of this period, the very beginning of January, and I still continued and made my, well, 28, I guess, with a broken wrist. So sometimes a lot does go wrong, you know. This one is called Distracted Riding. It's just kind of a takeoff on distracted driving. And even when you're riding a horse, you're really not supposed to be on your cell phone. You're supposed to be paying attention. This one's called, Actually, We Don't Know the Neighbors. And it's just a comment I overheard somebody say, and it just sort of cracked me up to have two neighbors that are so weird and different and critters, and they really should have met each other a long time ago because they would have enjoyed each other. I took part in another challenge with my Art Plus gallery friends in February of this year. I decided to use the theme of the Reading Pagoda, but putting it in fantasy settings. These are all 11 by 14. I used, you know, the same size. And this one is called Pagoda at Sunrise, and this is called Pagoda and the Big Snow. I was inspired again by my Art Plus gallery friends. Art Plus organizes the West Reading, Plein Air West Reading every year, and I decided to do plein air art quilting. It's not really the best idea. Art quilting is very much of an indoor sport, but I gamely took my collapsible table and some fabric out there and an iron. I found some place to plug in somebody's porch, and of course, I came back to my studio to do the sewing, the quilting on them. This one actually won a purchase award that year. The next year, 2018, these were sketches on fabric from the mural corridor in West Reading. I ended up gifting this to West Reading Revitalization Committee after Dean Rohrbach, the father of the mural corridor, died. This one, 2019, I won an award for this one, actually. I just did this from my front porch, so I had access to electricity for my iron. I use a sort of a heat-activated fusing on the back of my fabrics and fuse them down and arrange everything and quilt it then. I exhibit at usually about 10 art fairs a year, none for the last year. The last one, I was part of one for the Reading Berks Craftsman's Guild on May 1st. And my next one is Mount Gretna in August of this year. So I'm not going to do any this summer. I teach or taught, I guess I'll continue, classes in art quilts. These were students these are students at Galgo Works. This was at the Arts Barn in Schuylkill Haven. I also have taught in my own studio. That really works out the best. And I believe I'll start again soon. It's interesting. Look how people pick their own colors. She actually picked the colors that she's wearing and her in a way too. A series I did in 2018, I called Going Rural for a show at Art Plus Gallery. This one on the left is called A Separate Piece. A neighbor holdout, a farm that's holding out from all of the development around it. And this one is called Red Roof, Purple Sky. Not very original, I guess, because there's a red roof and a purple sky. This one is called From Hills and Valleys. Again, Kempton. I have a cousin who lives there, and I have done several of those from that show, Going Rural. This is the lower meadow in September. I've done several of this on our property, the goldenrod in September. It's just brilliant on the field looking across to Blue Mountain. Galleries that have my work, Art Plus Gallery in West Reading, where I'm currently the director, actually. The Arts Barn in Schuylkill Haven, Studio B in Boyertown, Arts and Crafts Gallery in Hamburg, Clay on Main. And this is from Long Trout Winery. I take these, I call them friendship wine totes, made out of recycled blue jeans, and they sell them up there. And this is at the Hamburg Gallery. When I travel, I still stitch. I developed this idea when we visited Eastern Europe a few years ago on a cruise. I took along some pieces of wool felt as a substrate, along with other fabric scraps. As we traveled, I visited flea markets in Berlin and Prague and picked up odds and ends and a bunch of used postage stamps from Eastern Europe. I did a drawing every day of something that we saw. Drawing on fabric and then stitch. It just turns out there's a lot of time when you're on a cruise when you can sit and stitch, and when you're on a bus or sailing or whatever, there was a lot of time to do all this hand stitching. These are all 5x7. I also love making little landscapes and bird quilts. This is one called The End of the Road. These are both 5x7, and this is a rose-breasted grosbeak, as you can see, on sheet music. So sometimes I combine papers too. I've been a member of an international group of art quilt artists called Cloth in Common for the last 3 going on 4 years. This is one of my pieces called Mysteries of Solitude and Joy. We each get a chance to issue a prompt. This prompt was isolation that somebody issued, so it was with this answer to that. And each person then, at the end of the 2 months, we post our final quilts. My proudest accomplishment was bringing Cuban artist Julio Cepeda to Reading in 2018. Jay and I saw his work in Trinidad, Cuba in 2015, and we formed a committee here in the Reading area to raise the money and publicize his visit beforehand. The hardest part turned out to be obtaining his visa for travel from the U.S. State Department after restrictions were imposed by President Donald Trump. But ultimately, we were successful, and his visit was a huge success. He sold about half of his pieces sculptures made out of found objects in his show. There's people that he met here that he's still in touch with. People have traveled to Cuba to see him. We've been down there twice since then, visiting Julio and his family. There's just sort of a road now between Reading and Cuba that was opened up by this cultural exchange when he was a visiting artist in residence at Goggle Works for about over 2 months. Okay, so after I made this decision to change my life, how do I feel about it? I'm very happy with my life now. Where we live, our garden, our 5 acres, we've just planted a forest. I guess you could say we're rewilding 2.5 of our acres, planted 750 trees there, waiting for them to grow up. We travel. Here's Jay. I believe that was in Berlin. No, I may be wrong. Here's me with a quilt I did, the destruction of apartheid, after a visit to South Africa. This is actually in San Diego a couple of years ago. Another group that I was in for a while. So would I have been this happy? Would my life have been this good without 33 years outside of the art world? I don't know. Working in factories and being a political activist without that part of my life, I do not know. I do know that I want to grab hold of every moment, create what's in my mind, and help others to do so too. I've made over 800 art quilts since I started the art quilts in 2008, and I'm still going. The end.
Wow. Some really amazing works there, Martha.
Thank you, Don.